Like we're playing the splash screens or we're live? So we have to do an audio check. So audio check, 1, 2. You guys,
Hello, hello,
Testing.
hello.
How's it?
Yeah.
we good? I think we're good, right, Darren?
Our boy, C Farsight. Let's go.
I'm assuming they can hear us. So it's good.
Console's
I'm
the only
not-
one that
I'm
doesn't
not-
look like a hobo right now.
I'm sorry, what?
Good evening and welcome to CanHammer, your stop for Warhammer 40k from the Great White North. Today's episode is a special fall episode, and due to the fact that it's getting really cold outside, we thought that we would warm you guys up with a little soup talk tonight. It was not cheesy, but that was great.
Did you plan that?
Yeah, I wrote it in the show notes. Yeah, I'm a loser.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Today's show is episode 190. So that's a good milestone for us. We're almost at the big 200. So joining me, I have Nick.
Hey.
And we have all the way from Quebec.
So far. How's it going, guys?
Francois, welcome. And as usual, I'm your host, Chris, at CanHammer Chris on Twitter and Instagram, if you're interested in seeing me build sisters. So how you guys been?
Good. Yeah. Lots of busy days at work. The semester is in full swing, and my students have suddenly realized they have work to turn in soon.
Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy week. So I was absent last week, which is very rare that I'm not on the podcast. So I feel left out all the time. But
we felt abandoned.
We did. Yeah, we felt abandoned. Yeah. Our fearless leader.
You guys did a good job without me. It's all good. So we're going to move right into news because a lot of crazy stuff has kind of dropped this week, and we're all pretty excited. Well, if you like Space Marines and maybe a little bit of Necrons, you should be pretty excited. So we're going to start off with just going through the stuff that GW kind of released, give our take on it, and then we have the leaks that kind of just dropped today from the new Space Marine Codex. So they sound pretty reparable. I can't say it. They sound good, and they sound like other things that I've kind of heard from other people. So they should be exciting to cover. So stay tuned. And then after that, we're going to get into kind of some soup talk and why you should soup, when you should soup, and I think that's something that's kind of coming up both in my gaming style, and you're seeing a lot more of it. There was a rumor at the start of this edition that soup was dead, and maybe that was just by some fluff bunnies. Who knows? But soup is not dead; it is alive and well. So we'll talk about that. So stay tuned. So we'll start off with the news. The first thing that really came out was the new reanimation protocols. So do you want to take us through that, Francois?
Yeah, sure. So they've reworked how reanimation protocol works. It's very, very different than what it used to be. So it used to be that if your unit of Necrons survived through the enemy turn, you could try to reanimate remnants of the squad, right? So if you had a 20 warrior blob and your opponent killed 18 and you had 2 left, you could try to bring them back at the beginning of the turn. Or in the command phase for a little bit. It was in the command phase for a short time with the Indomitus stuff. And so the big problem with that, obviously, is that with how killy the game is now, it was fairly common that you never got to reanimate because your enemy would just wipe your squad off the board. And reanimation was priced in for Necrons, right? The points reflected the fact that they could come back, but very often they didn't. So that left the Necrons in a weird spot where they sometimes felt overpowered if they could keep rolling for reanimation. And that especially happened at lower point levels. If you played a 500-point game with Necrons, they were actually quite oppressive because of that. But at 2,000 points, the game is so killy that you'd rarely get to use it, or not as often anyway. So now the way that it works is that you'll always get to reanimate unless you're wiped in one single attack. What I mean by that is that you'll get to roll after each unit activation. So if you're 20 warriors, they're getting shot at by, 10 intercessors, and the intercessors kill a few, then you reanimate each one of those Necrons that died. And you only do it for the models that died in that activation. So that's very, very different. And it's also very different for multi-wound models, because now what you do is you roll a dice per wound of models killed, wound lost of model killed. And then you put the successes in a pool, and then you use that pool to recreate full models for however multiples of wounds you have. So for 1 wound models, like warriors, it's super easy. You just roll and you get this many back. For multi-wound models like destroyers or wraiths, I guess, you need to have as many successes as at least the amount of wound of one of your models to bring 1 model back, and so on. So on 1 wound models, it definitely feels stronger. On multi-wound models, it depends, because you're going to get into situations where you actually want the enemy to kill more of your models so you can reanimate one, which is kind of a weird thing. And I guess we can get into the specifics of how the scenarios work in a little bit, but that is the gist of it.
Yeah, you don't necessarily want them to kill more, but sometimes it's beneficial, right? If they kill that. Now it's kind of neat, as you said, on single wound models, it's like a 5+ feel no pain essentially.
Well, it's better than that.
It's better, yeah.
Because if you get shot at by multi-damage weapons, you only roll once.
Exactly. But yeah, when you get the multiple ones, because you need to only create full models, that's a weird one, right? Because it's like, if you lose 1 Wraith, let's say, you're not reanimating him.
Exactly. And on warriors, it can be buffed to a 4-up rerolling ones. So you can get your warriors back pretty easily.
Yeah. And traditionally Wraiths, that was a bad example because they don't reanimate, but maybe they do now. Destroyers. I just don't.
Well, Wraiths could reanimate with a strat.
With a strat, yeah. I'm just covering my ass there on that one. So okay, go ahead, Nick. You had a point.
Well, I was just gonna say the system seems interesting because the way it's done, in a sense, it's cleaner than Feel No Pain, because all your guys die and then you do all that reanimate, right? Versus now, like if I have Terminators, you shoot, have to roll per Terminator, blah blah blah. But this is just the basic skeleton of it. So who knows what the Codex comes up with? Like, you could end up with pluses or minuses to that roll to make it easier for those multi-wound models. Who knows? Maybe there's a strat to pop like a exploding mechanic. Like you roll your reanimates, and for every 6, it explodes into 2 reanimation dice in the dice pool. Like, I don't know. I think that gives GW a lot of flexibility or space to work around that, making it either better or worse depending on whatever conditions they set. So I'm excited for it. And like Francois said, I think it's probably better, because especially when Space Marines showed up, like I don't see a lot of Necrons having had the opportunity before to reanimate.
Yeah. The next thing I kind of want to talk about, I didn't want to go too much into it, but Overlords have kind of this new directive ability that they can do. The first one is add 1 inch to a move, whatever. But the one that I really thought was, this is a 9th edition rule, was basically Directive 2 is if a unit is performing an action, it can still make attacks with its range weapons. So that was kind of cool, because that's a rule we've never seen before, but now they're going to be able to. So you're going to be able to have Overlords. I don't know if that's, obviously it could be once per phase, like 1 directive per phase, but you could have multiple units, let's say raise banners and shoot.
So we actually know how that works.
Oh, we do know. Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, the way that it works is that you actually have to pre-program your army in so that you get to use one of those protocols per turn, and then you order them yourself. And so turn 1, you're going to get this, turn 2, you're going to get that, and it's going to change per turn. But it's secret, so you have to write it down, which is a little clunky. But your opponent doesn't know the order that things will happen in, but you do. It feels honestly like an extra step. I'm not sure I like that.
But I think there's easy, man.
There's probably going to be stratagems to mess with it. We know the Silent King is a rule to bring in one of the protocols you did not pick and swap it in. So there's going to be some ways to manipulate it. And
when you plan your game out, you'll be able to easily do this. Like, okay, turn 2, I'm going to push up that unit. I'm going to also activate them. Like, I think it's going to be really good for them.
Yeah, it definitely adds a layer of depth to the army that wasn't there before.
Well, like, for example, so like we were talking in our list, and we'll talk later, like how sometimes you take little action units, like 45-point unit, to do actions because you don't want to commit a bigger unit to doing that because they'll forgo their shooting or whatever. So now, like, say for example, in one scenario, you put a protocol, the Sudden Storm, for turn 1, knowing you can hit 3 objectives turn 1 and you're on raised banners. Now you can jump on those objectives, raise the banners, and not forgo your shooting for that turn. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And, I can see like the confusion element of it being avoided by they just sell cards and you just line up your cards on the table, from left to right is turn 1 to 5, and then flip them as each turn goes by. Like, it seems like if I mean, it is a lot of mental work, I think, if you play Necrons, but I think people get used to it. And it seems like a really cool mechanic, in my opinion.
So first question coming in is, will there be a chance to reanimate without being attacked? We do not know at this point in time. So that'll have to wait for the book.
My guess is there is going to be a stratagem to do something like that, probably, or the Res Orb is going to do something. We don't know what it's going to do, right? But rerolls or a once per game reanimate past lost models, like something like that is going to be in there.
Yeah. So thank you, Lord Frill. Okay, next one is, what do you guys think of the new, like we could go through the rules, there's no real point, but what do you guys think of the Satan Shard model, the new one? The
Void Dragon.
The Void Dragon. He looks
I like
to me,
it, man.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
He looked like, I kind of thought he was ugly because he looks like a Silver Surfer with like
he
a
does.
crucifix for a head, right?
I'd like to see new paint jobs come up on Instagram of different people painting him. Him, whatever. And that, yeah, I feel like the Silver Surfer is like killing it for me a little, but I'm sure like people can make a really menacing paint job for him, and it's going to be awesome.
Because isn't the Void Dragon the guy that's stuck in Mars? Or is that a different one?
So yes, there is something.
Some dragon that's linked to the Satan.
Well, I don't want to say anything.
We don't know. We don't know enough to.
Yeah.
If we don't know enough, we'll move on. Anyway, Nick, you want to do? So the big Silent King, his rules were now leaked or released.
Some of them.
Some of them, yeah. On like it was shared on Warhammer Community. Yeah, so the Silent King, we're starting to understand like his floating rocks of death, those like 2 pylons that are presumably to protect him. So they have a shooting weapon at BS2, heavy 1, strength 12, AP 4, flat 6 damage.
Oh, that's
yeah. So like they're just gonna blow Venoms and Skyweavers out of the sky one shot, so that's pretty. I think that's pretty decent, depending on the points.
Not with their field of pain, but
well, yeah, I don't know.
He's got to roll 1-6. I think you'll be okay. But no, that's pretty scary, man. Flat 6 is terrifying in a game where they've been kind of hoping to get us to bring more vehicles out,
but it's a one-shot weapon, so you'll just roll ones half the time.
Well, unless he lets you reroll ones to hit. But yeah, so he's got that. He's also has a couple auras like Necron core units within 6 inches can reroll the hit rolls of their range attacks, and it says Necron core units within 6, so it doesn't say models. So like you can probably string out, and he looks like he's a fairly big model, so he's going to get some coverage with that. And then also core units within 6. Each time a model makes a melee attack, they can reroll the wound roll.
Yeah.
So like I don't know how many points this guy's going to be, but I feel like I'd be taking him. He's 16 wounds, tough 7. He's 3+ save. We don't know what else he has in terms of saves.
Yeah, we don't know if he has an invuln or quantum shielding or
anything like that. A feel no pain or how that all works. His own weapons, he's got a 24-inch assault 3, strength 8, -3, 2 damage scepter, and it's pretty potent in combat as well. But I think the big thing for me is his obeisance generators. He's basically a Judiciar, except it's every unit that are like, if there are any enemy units within engagement range of him, then they only fight until all of the other eligible units have fought.
That could be terrifying because they have a lot of combat punch. A lot of the new units are more melee focused.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, if they have like units like Praetorians or whatever that can heroic, so they can be on the sides of him. Somebody charges what's his face, they heroic in, and now all of a sudden the combat elements of the Necrons are going first. Who knows? Anyways, he can also deny psychic power, and like Francois mentioned earlier, he can change the command protocol that you didn't assign. So, good. And that's once per battle. So anyway, pretty sweet.
That allows you to take that one you really need, put it aside, and bring it in.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll go on to kind of the Space Marine leaks. Now, some of these are leaks from GW, and some of these are kind of internet leaks from people that have seen the book early, or rumors and weird things that we may have heard.
Let's take that with a pinch of salt. By the time you listen to this, the book might actually be out, and it might be totally wrong.
This is going up tonight, not tomorrow.
Take it as gospel that the Deca leaks are real.
So you wanted to make some comments about some Space Wolf stuff there, Nick, first?
Well, it's another kind of like Warhammer community thing. They've already release kind of some of the chapter tactics, including Dark Angels and Blood Angels and Space Wolves. And the one that jumped out to me is that Space Wolves are going, like every unit in that book that has a chapter tactic rule can heroic as if they were a character. That blows my mind, especially with a unit like with an army with Thunderwolves or with Wolfen, with that I don't know, seems good. What do you think?
I think it's interesting. I'm personally skeptical just because, well, I'm not skeptical. I don't know. I thought that Space Wolves were a lot better when they had all that OBSEC kicking around, which got taken away really quickly. But I guess we'll see how this one goes. No, it's definitely something to keep in mind. With the lower model counts, there might not be enough units to layer them in such a way that you could kind of maybe really capitalize on the countercharging. But maybe somebody could. So one of the interesting things that is our beloved Eliminators have had a rework. So you want to take us through that, Francois?
Well, this is, again, we're in leak territory here, but the rumor is that the Eradicators are going to unit size 6 from the 3 that they were at. And given that this probably, actually, I shouldn't say probably, it is the most oppressive unit in the Indomitus box set for their points. They're, 40 points a model. They're fairly cheap for what they
I thought they were 35, aren't they?
I think 35 is the Blade Guard and 40 is the Eradicators. But anyway, it's in that ballpark. And so they're Meltas. They shoot twice if they shoot at the same target. So a unit of 3 gives you 6 shots. It's already really strong for the points. If you can up the unit size, there's obviously a potential for that unit to become a little much, which arguably it already is, kinda.
Yeah.
There's one thing that makes me not want to panic right now, and that is their special rule means that they never want to split fire, because they get their double shots only if they shoot at a single target. So a unit of 6 might be a waste, in the sense that, yes, you're going to get 12 Melta shots out of that unit, and you're going to really kill something, but you're probably going to significantly overkill almost anything in game, short of maybe a Knight or a 4-up Greater Demon or whatever. So if you do that, and you take these big units, and you go like all in on Eradicators, pardon.
So I think I said Eliminators as well. I meant Eradicators.
To be fair, those Primaris names are all confusing. I knew what you meant. So if you go all in and take 18, that's like 700 and some points. That's probably too much, right? So we'll have to see. But my guess was that they would stay at 3. I didn't expect them to go to 6. So that's a bit of a surprise.
Especially when the rumor is that the bikes, the new Outriders, stay at 3, which is kind of weird because they should probably go up and they're less oppressive. But one of the big things is
it makes sense though. Yeah, it makes sense because we know that the Blade Guard and the Eradicators are getting multi-part kits, and so that's why I think they're going to a bigger unit size. The bikes, they haven't previewed any multi-part kits, so if they're not releasing a multi-part kit, it could be like the weird jump back autocannon guys from Shadow Spear, right? That never got a release, and so they stayed capped at 3.
Oh, wow.
I think Blade Guard at 6 is going to be pretty oppressive too.
That's at 5, because you put 5 Blade Guard and a Justiciar and an Impulsor, and there you go. You're in business.
Yeah, exactly.
And then 5 and Khan in the other one.
Yeah, 5 and Khan in the other. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Every White Scar that's coming this Saturday.
Well, it's funny because I played against Jeremy's, and he had a similar list to yours, where he had 2 units of Blade Guards and an Impulsor. Then you have 2 units and an Impulsor as well, Francois. And it's funny because both times I played you both were like, oh, I hope the unit size goes up. I hope the unit size goes up. And it looks like it might actually happen. So it's kind of interesting. One of the other big changes is there's no more fight on death for Space Marines, allegedly. So that's kind of a big deal.
Huge.
Yeah, because a lot of the power of the big G-Man is that, he buffs your army, he moves in, he kills some stuff, and then when your opponent finally actually removes them, he then kills you, right? Or
wait, it was it the fight twice or the fight on death that they said was gone? I think it's the fight twice.
Oh, it's the fight twice. Yeah.
Which is still huge. Like in a recent game, I fought twice with Blade Guards to kill a Knight, right? If I can't do that anymore, it kind of sucks. It's allegedly now reserved to Assault Intercessors, which in a way kind of makes sense because all the other types of Intercessors have their own special stratagem. Like the Assault ones get the auto hit, the basic ones, they get to shoot 4 shots. They all have their thing they can do. So Assault Intercessors getting that fight twice strat and no one else getting it kind of makes sense. At that point, did they keep it at 3 CP? I don't know. But, 41 attacks coming out of Assault Intercessors on the charge. doing that twice, you're now 82 attacks for your unit.
No, but
it's pretty good.
It sounds reasonable because like Thousand Sun Zangors have its exclusive Zangors have a fight twice and it's 2 CP.
Yeah, Marines were alone in having that without getting gated by something.
Yeah, you know, same thing. My beloved Repentia, 3 CP Repentia, and it's like there's a few units in there. It's not just it's a mortifiers as well, I believe. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really take them.
So that's another one that makes sense. And, you know, we're looking at these as they're just put out there by an anonymous source on the internet. So, you know, usually it's not worth much, but they all seem to make sense to me.
Yeah. Scouts are elites.
Yeah, that's actually, if that happens, I'll be very, very, very happy because I thought, you know, removing a cheap troop choice from the book, like Scouts, does change the Marine list. And so one of the big things is that Chapter Masters is no longer a CP to be purchased. It's 40 points on a model, and you can only pick one unit to reroll hits. So you factor in, okay, I want my Chapter Master so my one aggressor unit shoots. And then I can't take Scouts as my troops. I have to take, you know, the more expensive Primaris alternatives or Tactical Marines. We don't know what the Tactical Marine points are, but I'm assuming they'll go up when they go to 2 wounds. So now you're not only paying 40 additional points here and 5 additional points here for these guys, but you're also paying more for your troop element. It does change the power level of the army significant in all these little minor tweaks, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. Especially too, the same thing with their apothecaries, their chaplains. They want the upgrades. They're going to be paying points for those.
Yeah, which is a big deal because one thing that a lot of people give, I guess, crap to the Custodies for that, because the theory anyway, I don't know, I don't read minds, I don't know what GW was thinking, but the theory with the Custodies is that they were written to be a low CP army. That's why when you look at their strats in the previous edition, they were like, oh, they're okay, but they couldn't get the amount of manpower or units to get, you know, 18 CP or 15 CP. But now with one detachment, Custodies can go right up to the 17 CP essentially for the game. So they're able to stack these strats turn after turn after turn. And so I kind of feel the same way with the Marines, right? Is like maybe they're kind of keeping that in mind, right? That you know, they made all these CP upgrades for the Marine characters, and it was fine in the old edition because you had to take troop units to get the CP, and you had to take all these other little things which weakened the overall list, but it didn't because they won everything. But anyway, and then now it's you know, you're gonna have to pay more for that. So
no, I think it's I like too. I'm hopeful that it's going to balance them out a bit more, you know, but we'll see.
Oh well, definitely it sounds more like an aggressor shooting once, allegedly. That's gonna be huge.
So there's stuff we don't know. There's a bunch we haven't seen, but from everything that we have seen, both confirmed by GW and not, it does seem like they're getting toned down and maybe toned down significantly. So we'll see how the meta shakes out. It's also interesting because sure, there's Salamanders are super super strong, but if you look at whatever tournaments are happening right now in the plague times, Space Marines are no longer outrageously dominating like they were even like a year ago when the Iron Hands stuff was broken. There's a bunch of people winning tournaments with like Demon Monster Mash, and Harlequins are doing well, and Custodies and Death Guard. There seems to be a fairly healthy mix of factions doing well right now. So I don't think the Marines need a huge nerf bat. They need a bit of a tone down. So we'll see if GW managed to get that balance right, because there's not a big difference between toning them down to be good but not oppressive and making them all of a sudden go down to a mid-tier army, right? So we'll see if they manage to strike that.
And I think it's good for the hobby for them to be a top tier book.
Well, they obviously have to. Yeah.
They have to be. And I think in the past, the last couple of editions, they were a lower tier book, and it just doesn't look good. You know, I read a lot of Horus Heresy novels, and I love Space Marine lores, and I read a lot. Like the only codex I really read fluff out of is my Space Marine Codex, and because it's just so interesting and it's their thing. So yeah, if they're not top tier, we're definitely just kind of, you're not seeing Marines on the table, and it's very disappointing because that's the aesthetic that brings all the kids for like the new blood in.
Yeah, I was going to say that if you want new people to enjoy the hobby and to bring new people in, the first army that most people get is Space Marines. Like, it's really rare that someone is going to start collecting Slaanesh demons as their first army, right? I'm sure it happens. But if your Space Marines that you get in every starter box, and that's your first army, is super terrible and unfun to play, you're less likely to stick with the hobby.
Yeah, you have to have some things going on at home to start with Slaanesh demons.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Out of the basement and into the Slaanesh demons. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to our sponsors. So we'd like to always thank Dylan and Dan at Red Dragon for sponsoring us in our events. We have Hoyt at Thunder Gifts and Games. Please check them out online as well. And we have Dave at Tista Minis. So one thing is I recently bought some Lord of the Rings stuff from Dave, and he has a lot of used one-off models that you can check out. Red Dragon has a lot of used stuff as well, but sometimes you need that very specific model, and so check him out. Okay, and also we want to say thank you to all of our patrons and everybody that supports the show, and also the listeners out there. You know, there's no point in doing this without you, so thank you very much. We'll move on to our main topic, and so, yeah, you know, we don't want to beat this to death. We'll see how it flows, but soup is something that used to be a really taboo word in the hobby, and you would hear a lot of people say, "Oh, it's just chaos soup," and soup this and Imperial soup. Of course, their Imperial's winning. They got the soup list. And it was a big thing, right? And a lot of people were very down on it. And I think when this edition came out, and, you know, I heard it a lot. Maybe that's not the reality in your meta or what you heard, but a lot of people said, "Oh, soup's dead. There's no, you need CP. You can't take multiple detachments because you lose out on all your CP. So it's dead, and you lose your special abilities." And a lot of the more recent codexes have had abilities that we'll talk about later that maybe you lose because of souping in other units, and they've worded things that way. But so we just wanted to kind of go through that and kind of just give our take on it. So why should you soup? Francois, you want to take that one away?
Well, you should soup if you can get out of your cost, which is CP, something that will fix a problem with your army. If you have an army that's got a hole in it and you need a piece of tech, or you need to add more combat punch to an army that's not really combat-y, or vice versa, and that to you is worth the 2 or 3 CP or whatever, then you should soup. There's a cost, but there's also a huge benefit sometimes.
So you're saying the benefit outweighs the cost. You have to
think about it this way. You have to do a cost-benefit analysis there. I would like to add this piece of tech to my army. I'll use a specific example that just comes to mind right now. So Nick Nanavati has a Dark Eldar component to his Harlequin list, and he's doing that purely to get the Vexeter mask because he wants to counter the Judiciar, right? So if you think that you need for your army to work, because if Harlequins charge into a Judiciar, they're going to get minced, right? It's really bad for them. If you think you need that piece of tech to counter a bad matchup, in this specific example, well, then it may be worth paying 2 CP to bring in that detachment.
Okay, Nick, why do you soup? Or why should you soup? Not why you specifically do, but why should you?
Well, I think Francois covered it quite well. I mean, there's 2 big reasons in my mind. One is, you're trying to shore up weaknesses in your list, in your army. Another one also is you just want to play with a variety of models. Like, there's that simple thing, you know, on the kind of more fluff bunny side. I'm a little bit guilty of that at times. You like playing with
a lot of bit guilty, yeah.
A lot of bit guilty of that, yeah, exactly. But like competitively, like Francois said, it's some armies some books can feel like they have less options to them. They got kind of they have their shtick, but otherwise they are lacking in a lot of other elements of the game, and sometimes you have to shore that up by souping. So for example, like TJ Lanigan, for example, perfect example. His list isn't a secret. He'll tell you this. So he plays demons and Death Guard, like Nurgle. It's all Nurgle. So it's kind of the pseudo soup. It's kind of camouflage. People don't see it as soup. They just see it as Death Guard. But really what he's doing is he's putting demons and Death Guard together. And what he's doing in that regards, not only is in Chaos, for example, he's taking advantage of all the overlapping buffs, but with the Nurglings, he's able to get his early board presence that a lot of the Death Guard can struggle with, because most of the Death Guard is slow other than a couple of vehicles, and very few things in Death Guard can fly. The drones can fly, but they're kind of overcosted right now. So that's kind of, for example, that's one example of why you would soup, or an example list of soup.
Yeah, and you kind of stepped into our next souping point, which is what factions soup well. And the first one we had on the list was Chaos Demons, exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, right? Things like Death Guard require, as you said, they require that extra little kind of oomph, the board control, the really cheap, really amazing units. So that's another thing. When you look at the Chaos Demon list, so what factions suit well? Chaos Demons. You look at them, they have some great elements. We talked about like their monsters are really good, like their Keeper of Secrets, and things of that nature.
Yep.
But a lot of that book has like elements of it that are good, but it doesn't necessarily work really well as playing pure demons, in my opinion. Yes, you could probably do it and do really well, but you kind of just want to take that one element of the Keeper of Secrets, maybe one Bloodletter Bomb as your kind of your drop-in clear chaff or get into somebody's backfield, the ridiculously cheap Nurglings that are amazing and kind of do everything you need them to do in this edition and win all the primary objectives. So that's kind of the demon aspect of it. The next faction that soups really well, and I know Francois. Oh,
sorry to cut you off. Yeah, I just want to say why another big reason why Chaos does it so well is the Chaos God keywords. That's kind of what helps that function, I say, a bit above and beyond all the other soup factions, and why you'll see more Chaos players soup than probably any other player is because, for example, like TJ, though he's using Death Guard and Demons, they share the Nurgle keyword. So now all of a sudden his Great Unclean One or his, other demon characters are going to benefit his Death Guard elements. Like stuff is silly. Like, I don't know if it's the Spoil Pox Scrivener or the Sloppy Bowpepper. One of them adds, they're a Herald of Nurgle. So if it's a Nurgle detachment, they add 1 damage on a 6 to wound. But now all of a sudden his Plague Burst Mortars, if he rolls a 6 to wound, are an extra damage. You wouldn't think that would happen, but that's how those kind of buffs can overlap.
Because they're demon tanks, yeah. Actually, you do it really well. You caught because my sisters ignored -1 and 2 AP, and you had this soup combo that kind of screwed me over. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, exactly. You have to dig. Mark Perry is good for this. TJ Lanigan. I got one little trick that impressed Chris, so I was pretty happy about that. So
it was good, man. It was good.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, so in War of the Spider, one of the new strats was when you have a Mephitic Blight Hauler, you pop at the beginning or during the movement phase, and for the rest of the player's turn, any enemy unit within 7 inches of that Mephitic Blight Hauler suffers an extra AP on any attacks allocated to that unit. But it's one of the few strats that doesn't say from Death Guard units. And so Chris's army, being Valorous Heart, that ignore AP 1 and 2, is bad for my rubrics because that's their big thing, AP 2. Except now...
And you pay the premium to have that, right?
I do pay the premium, so they kind of... they fall flat against your sisters, and we've seen that when I run out of Mephitic Blight Haulers. But in this situation, now I'm able to just jump their AP to AP3 with the Mephitic Blight Hauler and punch through that sister's armor. And that's kind of one of those examples of soup where, like I was thinking there's Custodes, there's sisters, especially in our meta. I was going to have to figure out a way to get through that with my Inferno Bolters, whether it's Scarabs or Rubrics, and that was kind of one of those interactions.
Cool. So I guess we'll move on. This is an army that both Francois and I play, so Astra Militarum. And so I think they soup really well. So what's your take on that, Francois?
Yeah, so Astro Molotarum has always been kind of this is what you bring in to shore up a problem with your Imperium army. Throughout 8, it was for command points. People would bring their Loyal 32. Sometimes they'd go Anmech, but very often it was Guard. And the Guard range is massive. Yes. It's got pretty much everything. It's got combat punch if you want to bring Bullgrins. It's got artillery for non-line of sight shooting. It's got the brutal firepower of tanks. It's got hordes if you want to bring 100 guardsmen, you can. So there's lots of options in that book. But as a solo book, right now anyway, it's lacking a little something. Like it's been power crept a little bit. But with the wide variety of units in that book, you can identify a problem with another army and solve that problem. Whether that be your Custodes army needs more bodies for objective holdings and you want to bring in some deep striking scions. Like that's something that people do, right? You're fixing a problem with your army, not enough bodies. Fine, I'm going to get some cheap scions. Bring them in. Or what you're doing with your army, and I'll let you explain that.
Yeah, so I do the opposite. I soup in the Guard. So one of the things that really hurts my Sisters of Battle, or Adeptus Sororitas, is that things like aggressors, like Francois and I have played a plethora of games, and those aggressors, if I don't deal with them, or if I take a chance on them, and even actually in my tournament game against Jeremy a while back on the final table, if I take that chance to get rid of those aggressors and it doesn't go well, they have enough firepower to literally take off enough of my army that I almost can't recover if I misplay it. And which of course sometimes you do. And so a lot of the guard elements is you can take in things like mana cores and basilisks and even guardsmen squads, and they can kind of shore up that part of your army that's missing. So the mana cores, you can give 2 of them solid 3 damage. So you can sit at the back of the board, shoot out a line of sight, and you can essentially eliminate the guys, eliminators and aggressors at range and out of line of sight, pun intended. And so it's a major weakness. So if I'm scared of Francois' aggressors, just artillery those things to death, and then I could push in turn 2 or 3, probably 3 with my army, and clear them off of the objectives without the risk of them coming out and aggressors just deleting my army. Because we had a lot of games like that where it's very close, and then those things just turn the tide in the end. So that's really good. The other thing I really like about Astra Militarum is, well, they have basically, they're one of the best ways to get CP back. So you can take a cheap commander, and on a 5-op, every time a stratagem's used, you basically you get a CP back. So max 1 per turn or whatever, but it adds up a lot. Especially in something like Sisters of Battle, where it's 3 CP to fight twice, or you're using a lot of abilities.
And you're basically getting the CP that you paid for your guard attachment back throughout the game, right? So it's the disadvantage of bringing it is almost not there.
Yep. And then the other thing too is that they have the move order, and this is probably one of the it almost makes the guard infantry one of the fastest units in the game, right? If you ignore really Eldar, because it's like you can advance or you can run, you move them, and then you do it again. So you can literally go from your zone to in the opponent's objectives with these OBSEC 10-man units, and it's amazing. And there's a lot of other things you can do with the guard, and they work really well. And I think the guard on their own, as Francois said, are very weak because they don't have a lot of counterpunch. The only real combat unit they have is the Ogrins, which were enough last edition, but now I don't think the Ogrins for their points cost are enough to keep people out of your guard army. So that's where Sisters of Battle and them pair really nicely, because the Sisters have basically glass cannons that nuke people.
Oh yeah, Repentias are a lot better than Bulgrin as counterchargers. That's
and way cheaper, cheaper.
Not nearly as resilient, but that's not really what you need, right? You don't need a Tarpit unit at that point. If you want that, you can drown the enemy in guardsmen, I guess. You need something that will hit hard on the charge.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen lists too, guardsmen with Space Marines and things like that. But those are more, I think, with Space Marines, you're just better off taking more Space Marines. The next kind of soup faction I thought would be good is you see a lot of people take Craft World Eldar in their soup. So if you look at like Harlequins and you look at Dark Eldar, which are the ones that soup well with Eldar, they don't have necessarily the psychic powers that the Craft World have. And a lot of the psychic powers kind of bleed over to all.
Well, that's been nerfed heavily, actually. Like, it used to be that you could doom something with your Farseer, and then your Dark Eldar or Harlequin component would reroll wounds against it. Well, they've fixed that. So now you can no longer doom a knight and reroll all your haywire hits with Harlequin Bite. Just nuke a knight that way.
I think why you see the craft worlds in something like a Harlequin list is the Harlequins are super fast, super mobile. They can get up into the face and surgically attack where they want. What the Harlequins are missing is kind of that backfield shooting support, and that's where Eldar where craft worlds can make up for it with their it's their artisan equivalent, expert crafters, right? They're expert crafters, war walkers, or maybe not night spinners. You don't see them as much anymore.
Wave serpents.
That's shooting damage.
Yeah.
You also see a lot of 20-man Guardian units, right?
Well, now the Guardians are pretty expensive. I think it's more Dire Avengers now that people use, because Dire Avengers can be made actually surprisingly resilient. If you take lots of the Dire Avengers with a sermon, they're not Exarch, they're special dude. He gives them an invuln, right? So I think nowadays it's more Dire Avengers. But think about it this way: if you want, like, I'm building a Harlequin army right now, and I'm going to play it as pure Harlequin because it's fun. But if you wanted to shore up the glass cannon side of the Harlequins, what you can do is just bring in a small Craft World detachment, 3 Wave Serpents, 15 Dire Avengers, park them on your back objectives, give them pulse lasers or missile launchers or whatnot, give them the reroll 1 hit, 1 wound. They're going to be a very effective fire base. They're super annoying to kill, and when you have Harlequins in your face, you're not going to shoot Wave Serpents. If you do kill them, the Dire Avengers come out on the objective and obsec it. I think there's actually some interesting stuff you can do there.
Oh, exactly. And then a lot of the other Eldar stuff too. They have a lot of really good special rules. Things like you can take one unit of warp spiders because they're a bit expensive, and you can basically jump them up in orbit for the entire game, and then they come back down. And there's a lot of cool tricks like that, but I think the spiders are getting a bit expensive. And also there's these things called hornets, which are really fantastic and cheap.
I was going to say hornets, yeah.
I have 3.
Yeah. I have 3 as well, but I don't have the Harlequins to go with it because somebody bought them all of me. But
that's because I bought all the Harlequins available in Ottawa.
yeah. But yeah, so the Eldar, you do see a lot of them with the Harlequin lists online when you look through them of various degrees. Next one is Dark Eldar, kind of turning into a good souping army with a lot of the Eldar factions. And Francois kind of talked about that earlier, so we don't want to harp on the Vexlator mask. In the past, it was Vect. Nowadays, that's not super important, but it still could be effective if you want to work on something like that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the trade-offs to get that in seem pretty
because you pay CP for your detachment, then you pay 4 CP to Vect something. It's starting to be a really costly investment.
I don't know. Some Dark Eldar players, they really lean heavy on the Vex, so I don't know.
Well, if you're playing pure Dark Eldar, then that's fine, right? Because you play that triple patrol thing where you still get all your CP.
Yeah. That's right.
And you start with 12, you go up to 17. Then you can Vect like 2 or 3 times a game, and that's fine. But if you're like playing Harlequins or Craftware Eldar, and you just want to bring in that small Dark Eldar detachment, and you're paying 2 CP for that, plus 4 for Vect, plus however many CPs you need to feed your army, which for Craftworld is not that many, but Harlequins are actually super CP dependent. They have a lot of good strats.
See, but I was thinking, like, if you're playing the Harlequins against Custodes, because I was at one point in time thinking about returning to my Eldar, and are you worried about Tanglefoot?
Yes.
And wouldn't a Vect be like, no, I'm going to hit
so there's a couple of things here. Tanglefoot doesn't work on fly units, so it doesn't work on the bikes. So you still have that. For the bikes,
on their own.
On the troops, for sure. But the Harlequins are fast enough that you can probably position yourself close enough to something that even with a Tanglefoot, you're still going to make your charge. It's more, I think, all the AP 1 and 2 that Harlequins have that the Terminators can ignore, like you're going to bounce there.
Yeah,
that's more the issue to me.
You can't afford to bounce with that army. If
you bounce with Harlequins, if you commit and you bounce, you're probably done, right? Because they're not very durable.
But then again, I don't know if Vect is worth it. Instead, you just hit multiple targets. Do you do other things that are maybe a lot cheaper and easier to go? Yeah. But it is.
I don't think it's worth it, but it's something you can think about. Yeah.
But the mask for sure is worth it for now. So it's until that disappears, which it might. Now the last kind of faction I wanted to talk about is a good soup one, and you see a lot of this in a lot of tournament lists is Space Marines. So a lot of Imperial players, they just want to play really their army, right? You're a guard player, you want to play guard. You're a sisters player, which I do. So, and I can't do this, but when you're a sisters player, you want to play sisters. You don't want to maybe just move to pure Space Marines and take like that kind of really good list. The units within the Space Marine Codex are so good, and a lot of them work so well on their own. Yeah, they're much better with certain tactics and various things like that. But just having those units and the variety of those units kind of put in your list to fill that gap that you don't have are kind of good. You see a lot of that when you go through a tournament list, maybe not the top, but in the middle tier list, you'll see a lot of people taking like eliminators or not eliminators. What are they? The eliminators or the melt ones? Eradicators. I got to get that straight, man.
Even at the top, there's at least one guy who made Imperial Fists and White Scars work together. I think there's some stuff you can do.
We didn't define that in soup as well, but you can kind of in faction soup, like you guys are saying, the White Scars with Imperial Fists, or whatever mix of different chapters, and maybe it qualifies as soup because they do lose some benefits if they do that. So.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So I think that's good for any other factions that you guys feel soup well. Those are the ones that when I went through the last maybe week of tournament results stuck out to me was those kind of 5. Anything else?
Yeah, maybe we should quickly mention even armies that can't traditional soup because they're monofaction armies like Necrons or Orcs or what have you, Tyranids. There is still an argument to be made for taking separate detachments of 2 different sub-factions. Like for Tyranids, you might want a Kronos detachment and a Kraken detachment, right? And then you have to think, is this worth the CP that I'm paying? and maybe it is, maybe it's not. Like Tyranids don't have a massive amounts of great strats right now, so maybe it is worth it to have your Hive Guard be Kronos and your Gene Stealers be Kraken, right?
Yeah. And so I guess the next kind of comment on soups I want to cover was, which will be a very short one, is soups in the ITC ranking, right? So you can soup within faction, like you guys just mentioned, and you can still get the ranking points for those factions. So like I technically soup sometimes Valoris Heart and Bloody Rose, or I go pure Bloody Rose, but those both count as sisters in terms of ITC ranking. But the second you soup in another faction like Guard, you are now playing for the generic Imperium.
Yeah.
Rankings. So
you
I just
lose
kind of
out
want
on
to point
the
that out.
faction. Yeah, you lose out on that faction trophy or running or whatever. So
Bragging
like for
rights.
example, bragging rights. Well, like I'm primarily a kind of a Thousand Suns player, but because I add like demons and some Death Guard, I'm only going to be on the Chaos roster.
Which is a lot of and the one thing to notice with the rankings, and we won't harp on this too much, is that generally the soup rankings are much harder to place well in because the amount of people playing in them and the power level of soup armies, not always, but generally is a little bit higher than non-soup armies. Generally, Marines maybe are an exception to that, and maybe some of I guess like in the last edition, like I think Craft World Elder was kind of the exception to that as well. They could work on their own, but for the most part nowadays in 9th edition, a lot of the soup lists are doing quite well if they're not Marines. So that's something to think about as well. And you might see people taking a weaker list, placing lower just to get maybe that faction pure ranking. Sorry, Francois, you want to say something?
No, that's fine. We've moved past it.
Cool. And then the last one is why should you not soup? So that was kind of the segue from the rankings. Maybe you don't soup because you want the rankings, but there's a lot of other reasons why you shouldn't. So what's one of those, Nick?
Well, some armies you lose benefits for souping. So for example, Grey Knights, made famous by their tides, that depending on what tide you're in, it improves either their psychic powers or their shooting or whatever. Well, as soon as your army is not all Grey Knights, you lose those tides, which is, and some people will argue that it's not that important, but they do add a considerable benefit. So not only are you paying the CP and whatnot to add an additional detachment, you are also losing those specific rules that Grey Knights would get if they were a pure army.
So what are some examples of maybe abilities that are okay to lose? Francois, do you know any that you don't mind losing, like certain factions?
The first one that comes to mind is if you're playing with the Space Marine Codex, probably the Codex I'm most familiar with, so let's use that as an example. If you want to, like for instance, if you're souping with your Imperial Fists, well, the Super Doctrine for Imperial Fists only works in the Devastator Doctrine, so it only works for that first turn. So maybe you don't mind losing that, especially nowadays in a game with more terrain, more obscuring, where most of the time, or very often anyway, on a good table, on turn one, very little happens. And so maybe that bonus isn't a big deal to lose.
Yeah, I agree. For my army, it's a definite trade-off because I like the ability of +1 to my advance and charge, right? Like when you're rolling for faith dice and when you're rolling charges, that goes a long way, especially with deep strikers. And so I do lose that to soup it. So that's something that I have to really keep in mind is the fact that I might fail the odd charge late game because I don't have the prepper dice. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, in some ways you could look at it and go, well, it causes me to wait for the proper faith dice before I commit. And it might, temper my aggression, which is something I'm working on. Sometimes good, but yeah. Other like some factions don't lose anything for souping. Right. Like I would say Eldar lose almost nothing. All three of them.
Well, so this is an issue with older codexes. So GW has been writing newer codexes, giving armies extra benefits if they remain solo, right? So Space Marines have it, Sisters have it, Grey Knights have it, with the addition of the Psychic Awakening Tides. More recent books have these things that you get extra if you're a pure army. Older books, like the Chaos books or the Eldar books or the Imperial Guard book, they don't have that because that's not how GW was writing books at that time. But I expect that as codexes get rewritten, they'll all get a little something like that.
Yeah. There is a Chaos book that it's kind of loosely related to the topic. The Demons book, actually, if you consider the different gods, mixing them soup, then you do lose a benefit. And a lot of people don't know some of these benefits. But for example, if you're all Nurgle, I kind of referred to it earlier, Nurgle units within 6 or whatever inches of a herald gets +1 damage on a 6 to wound. But as soon as you add other gods in that detachment, you lose that, what they call locus.
Yeah, but if you look at the locus, that's a good example. They're all like, yeah, if you're gonna play pure because that's what you want to do, it's fine, but they're not worth it.
Well, so yeah, they're rarely worth it.
That
so,
Nurgle one, yeah, might be worth it with 3 Plague Burst Crawlers.
The Slaanesh one for your Keeper's detachment, because you want them to be able to advance and charge.
So that's if you're only taking the keeper. Generally, people are only taking the keepers, right? And then
in the history of Tzeentch, I don't think anybody's ever, even if they were pure Tzeentch, remembered the Tzeentch locus.
And that's the one, I guess, that I feel the strongest attached to, because I generally historically used to play a lot of Tzeentch demons, and it was just like, it's garbage. So so you have to keep that in mind, that certain lists suit it better than others, and that's why you might look at somebody's list and their soup list might be as pure Nurgle for that exact reason, because it pairs really well with Death Guard. So I think that's pretty good for the soup topic. So now we're going to move into Q&A. So we have a couple questions, and if you type them into the chat in either Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, we'll answer any questions you guys might have. We have, I think, 1 or 2, and then we'll probably call it a night. So what are the Discord questions there, Francois?
So on Discord, we have a bunch of Custodes questions, which I guess we're going to leave for when Darren comes back to answer.
Let's answer some. I wanted to answer some of them. I want to answer some.
Okay. All right. Well, some people want to know how Sisters of Silence work. I'm not even sure I can answer that.
Are you talking about they don't technically soup with Custodes?
Yeah, I guess
they go into Rhinos.
They go into Rhinos. That's what they do. Yeah, you're allowed to bring them in a Custodes detachment without losing your Custodes detachment.
Exactly, and you don't lose your rankings. As far as that's from a soup point of view, so they don't remove any of your CP. The other thing is that Custodes sometimes have extra elite slots, so it's not a huge deal. And a lot of the detachments in 9th Ed have more elite slots than I guess we're used to. Not by many, but so they're definitely good. I think if Sisters of Silence were a troop choice, they'd be really good.
Well, Custodes can suffer in terms of the board presence, especially on the missions that require at least 2 objectives to start scoring your primary. So throwing a couple of units in Rhinos, I was joking, but it's kind of a strategy, is that gives you a little bit of that extra board presence. They can shoot off to the edge objectives, sit there, and the opponent usually has bigger fish to fry when they have a Laris or whatever else coming in at them, Praetors or Ares or whatever stupid stuff that the Custodes have.
Yeah, and units of transport are good for that, right? Move on to an objective. Now I need to commit 2 full units firing to clear both the Rhino. So you have to kind of gauge your firepower to remove that Rhino. And then, of course, if you overkill the Rhino, those shots are lost. And then you have to commit another unit to kill the unit within it. And there's a lot of tricks you can do with transports, to get, if it's a decently far charge, and then you dump the Sisters out behind it, gives you a long range. But yeah, as far as soup goes, they're I assume that I treat them as if they're part of the Custodes.
Actually, we've already kind of answered that, but there was another question about Sisters as to whether or not it's worth putting them in Rhinos, and that I can feel very confident answering yes, it's worth it. I've played against Darren a lot, and his adding the Sisters in Rhinos has added a dimension to his game that was definitely missing before.
If he's patient with them,
yes.
When he's too aggressive with them, they just give. I remember one time he moved him right up and he jumped him out to stream me, and then I just put Celestine into them and went into the back corner. But
I remember one time he just drove them off the board. I don't know what he was doing, but he just drove them off the board.
Yeah, it's crazy, but no, they're definitely good. Now Rhinos I find a little bit pricey for what you get if they're not a combat unit.
Yeah, we're slandering Darren while he's not here.
Not always slandering him, but it's good. Yeah, but no, they're good. Okay, so is there any more questions you want to answer from the Discord?
From the Discord, someone is suggesting we do an assassin episode, or maybe an assassin segment, or maybe they're asking Darren to do an episode on assassins in Custodes. I'm not entirely sure what the question was actually about, but assassins are fun, and I guess that's some kind of souping as well. Though now they have special rules for being able to be taken like Inquisitors in Imperium detachments, so you can just bring them in without losing your stuff.
So I would say it's not souping. Yeah, they're not. They're just a part of Imperial armies. But yeah, I think we could save that for another show because I have a lot of interesting thoughts and things that assassins could be good for, and I've used them and they haven't worked well.
CP.
Yeah. So, any more from the Discord?
No, that's it. We've covered it.
Great. Yeah, we'll leave the rest of the Custodes questions for Darren to sort out later. So we do have a question from YouTube. So not really a soup question. If you don't want to answer, no problem. We don't mind answering. We didn't get a lot of questions tonight, which is fine. Curious what you guys think of 3D printing becoming larger in the hobby and in the competitive scene. Ooh. Who wants to
well, there's a 3D printer right here off the screen next to me.
You're fired.
So I think that. So this is my personal opinion, but I do feel somewhat strongly about it. I think that 3D printing is great for like accessory stuff. Like I wouldn't want to 3D print a full model necessarily. That's my own sense of, well, I do want to support the company, otherwise the game will cease to exist, right? If we all start 3D printing models, then something's going to happen there, right? But I think if you want to, so I've 3D printed the stuff that I've 3D printed. I've 3D printed objective markers. I've 3D printed terrain, Tyranid spires. I've 3D printed craters. I've 3D printed bits also, I think are great for 3D printing. I've printed a bunch of Thunderhammers because I'm not going to buy like 6 Vanguard Vet boxes to get Thunderhammers for all my Intercessor Surgeons, right? So I've printed some Thunderhammers. For that, I think they're great.
Yeah, Combi Meltas. I just had Nick, I guess I won't say his last name just in case because of his job, but the other Nick, not this Nick, he printed me a bunch of Combi Meltas, right? Because you don't get a lot of those bits in the boxes and you need sometimes lots of them.
I think 3D printing, there's a gray area that's kind of hard to describe what the threshold is when you know, kind of the right and wrong element of it, but you know when you've passed it. You know what I mean? I think that's it. So like, for example, I'm on board like bits or like, say, for example, you got a knight with 2 thermal cannons. What are you
I'm laughing because you're making me think of the old saying about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know what? That's probably what reminded me of that. But anyways,
sick. You guys are sick.
We are sick. But 2 thermal cannons, like knights don't come with those. So are you gonna buy 2 knight boxes for those thermal cannons? So then, yeah, you can make an argument. Whatever, you 3D print or like if you want chaosified knights, there's not a lot of kits for that. There's the 1 GW cells, the Forge World one, but sometimes we want yours to be more Nurgle. You still have to buy the chassis from GW. So I think there's some allowance there. But this idea where a lot of people are using as an alternative because they're rationalizing that it's too expensive to buy a Caladius or it's too expensive to buy this, so now they're going to 3D print their armies. Well, I feel like then the rest of the community that are buying GW product are kind of keeping the hobby alive for them, where they're the ones, I don't know. You can get deep down this rabbit hole, but bottom line, I don't agree with people 3D printing models that exist like as plastic kits, whatever else,
Mukasa says, "Ugh, why doesn't GW sell bits? I don't want a printer, but I want bits."
Yeah. Well, there are services that will 3D print bits for you, so you don't necessarily need to own a printer. The only reason I have one is that my wife has one for work, and it happens to be here now because she's working from home now because of COVID. So her lab is shut down on campus. So there's like a ton of lab equipment in my basement that normally wouldn't be here, but you can use it for that.
Yeah. So I guess Edward's asking how many sisters in a Rhino. So if you're talking specifically, we're talking about the Custodes Sisters of Silence, you would take a minimum unit because you have to remember that the reason they're in the list, either 1 unit, 2 units, whatever you want, is to either start in the Rhino, get out of the Rhino on a backfield objective and kind of screen out that 9-inch bubble from people outflanking and things of that nature or hiding in terrain. Or they're going to stay in the Rhino on an objective. Then, of course, or the Rhino is going to move forward and screen somebody out, or they're going to move forward in the Rhino. So they're not there to kill anything, and they're not there to do any of the other stuff. So you want to have them as cheap as possible. You want to take the cheapest variant because they aren't going to kill anything. Now, they do have strats and things like that I think when Darren was really crushing me in one of our practice games, he was using, but that was more to show off. because he was crushing me.
Darren is so good, and just like showing, yeah, exactly. No, but that's a great point. Or like, say you're playing up against somebody, for example, Chris. If he has 3 units of repention, he outflanks them, and you don't want those getting to your meaty center. Then you can have the girls in the rhinos go up the flanks and cover the flanks so that he can't outflank them towards the center of where your army is. So
yeah, specifically for board control. Now, there's other ways to do that in a Custodes army, and a lot of the more recent lists are they don't have the points available to throw the sisters and the rhinos in, because it does add up. But I definitely liked Darren's list at the last tournament when he actually did zone out with them. I think the game against Dominic, he kept him in a clump and he got horseshoed, we call it, when you get surrounded. But
well, we all got eliminated by Dominic, so can't fault
badly.
Much. Yeah.
But if you when you think about screening and moving things out, it's a very big deal, especially with how cheap it is to outflank units for every army in this edition, right? We've never had this before, where nine power level worth of units can outflank for 1 CP. Like, I have 1 power level units that are like 26 points, and I can outflank and do objectives with. It's amazing.
Or reliably. Because I remember in 7th you could reserve, but then you were rolling for it. And I remember one turn.
What sides you were coming in too? You'd be like, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like 1, 2 was left, 3, 4 was right, and then 5, 6 was anyone you wanted. Yeah.
I remember one game I played against the Eldar jet bike army, and he like kind of lined up all the jet bikes on the line. So I had my whole demon army reserved, and it was just like one demon prince flying up, avoiding dying, and just waiting for the army to come in. But I only rolled them like the exact last turn they could come in, so I had no army for most of the game. So this is the first time ever that you've been able to just pick and choose where our guys come, where your units come from, and for such a low CP cost.
Yeah, it's pretty good, and it just makes like some of the tactics that a lot of people were like, oh, they're dead in 9, like screening and wrapping. They're still valid and very useful tactics. Just you have to think about them differently with the points cost of things going up. Yeah. Thank you for the kind words. There's a couple people. America says he loves the podcast. By the way, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And with that, I think that's a good way to end it. And I think it was great show. Thanks for joining me, Nick and Francois, and our overlord Darren, who's listening in but is unable to participate because of interruptions tonight. So thanks, guys, and please check out our sponsors, and if not, support your local game store. Have a good one.